does look like I have some stats on him, which overall look like he plays pretty tight, which definitely proved true during the match. He definitely played fairly tight. Excuse me. So that's basically all I have to go off of. The 7-6 hand here on the left, standard play pre-flop for me. I like to flat this hand. I think it's good enough to flat. Same thing on the flop. I think it's good enough to check call. The turn, I'd be check folding if he had bet. Just not a good card for me. And on the river here, this is definitely a kind of interesting play, but I really like it. I'm turning my hand into a bluff, obviously, and I think this play is really good. I think it gets him off 10x, queen x, stuff like pocket 8s, pocket 9s, and maybe even like a weak king x, like a king 2 or king 3 type thing. I think he would probably check behind on the turn. It might not, it probably won't fold out 2-pair. I wasn't really expecting it to fold out 2-pair, but there's a chance it would fold out 2-pair. So I think it's pretty good. And on top of that, just from, game theory standpoint, it's pretty much one of the worst hands I can show up with on the river. So it makes sense to bluff with it if I want to also be value betting some jacks, and possibly stuff like ace 10. Yeah, I like it, and he makes a really small raise, which obviously I'm gonna fold to. I think this is a bluff, almost never, which I think is kind of bad for him to be making that raise sizing because he can never bluff. I think his raising range on that river should be really, really polarized to just a jack or a bluff. And because of that, I think he should size his raise as a default really large. He should make it really large. I mean, from a theoretical standpoint, when your range on the river is really, really polarized, you obtain max value from the game from betting as much as you can. Now, on a practical standpoint, I don't think he should just shove all in there on the river. I think that would be kind of ridiculous, and in practice, I'd probably, I just don't think in practice it would really work out that well. I think you could probably get more value from making a smaller raise than that. Yeah, I definitely don't think a min raise makes much sense unless he's raising like a set of 10s on that river or something, or ace 10, which I don't think he really should be. It's kind of close, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think he should be. So on the right here, this is going to be kind of the first flop we play with me in position, and I'm going to check back ace high. I'm going to pause the video here and just talk a little bit about my strategy in this match as far as c-betting, and how it kind of related to the rest of the match. Throughout this match, he flats a really tight range out of position, and he also 3-bets a somewhat tight range, although somewhat medium-ish. But overall, he folds his big blind about 70% of the time during the match. And what that means basically when I'm raising 100% buttons is that I have that automatic edge built in pre-flop. But the other implications of that are very important for post-flop, in that because he's folding so many big blinds, his range when we do play a hand post-flop is just going to be much, much tighter than most players, and it's going to be much, much stronger than my button range, obviously. And because of that, I'm going to be forced to check behind a bunch, because he can pretty much just own me post-flop because his range just that much stronger than mine. If I c-bet with reckless abandon. So what that means is that I'm going to have to be checking back a ton. The good thing about that is that I'm not really giving up anything. He's the one that's giving up expectation by not flatting enough pre-flop. If you do the math on it, by folding 70% of his blinds, he's giving up enormous edge to me on the button. I don't have the math in front of me right now, but I remember, I'll pause it for the hand on the left as well. I remember doing some math on it the other day, and just a very small decrease in the amount that the big blind defends can mean a huge profit for the small blind. So, all in all, I'm going to get back to that concept throughout the match and kind of what it implies for our play. But I'll leave it at that for now. On the left here, pretty standard re-raise for me early on in the match. This is a hand that I won't always re-raise, but when my image is still good, I will re-raise. And on the flop, I think it's a pretty standard just bet and fold. Unless he made it like a min raise or something, then I would probably call to try to just take the immediate odds that he was giving me. The reason it isn't a bet and shove, like say he raised to 110 here or something, I think the reason it's not a bet and shove is, one, our equity isn't all that great when we get it in. We're going to be pretty much crushed most of the time, probably, if I had to guess, somewhere in between 25 and 30% equity, because he'll be raise calling some better draws on that flop. And on top of that, it's just not a flop that he should really be raise folding ever, or close to ever at these stacks, at 100 BB stacks. Sorry. It's just going to be a pretty large mistake if he starts raise folding that flop. The amount needed for us to shove over his raise, because we're going to be nutted on that flop so often. So the hand on the left here, and we just re-raise on the right at the same time. Both the king deuce of hearts and the queen four here are pretty standard re-raises for me as well. And the reason I check this flop instead of bet is because it's kind of a couple of reasons. First, it's a flop where I don't think I have a lot of fold equity versus overcards. I think it's a flop that just gets floated on a ton. Ace high is pretty much never going to fold, or really never should either. And I don't think king high folds really ever. I mean, if he has like something like king 8 suited, which I don't think he does, but if he did, he might fold something like that. But most of his king x hands are going to be broadways with two pretty strong overcards, and they're just not going to fold on this flop to a c bet. Even some hands like queen jack might not fold, queen 10 might not even fold. So I'm pretty much only getting him to fold out like suited connector type hands, which don't make up a very large percentage of his range. So overall, I don't think my fold equity is that high. And another thing too is in the first few hands here, I have 3-bet kind of a lot just for these first few hands, which doesn't really mean anything, but it could mean that he's defending a little bit lighter on this hand, looking to make a few more moves than he normally would, or he's less likely to fold post flop, etc. So I just decided to kind of give up on the flop. But on the turn, I turned some equity, and it's more likely now that he'll fold. He'll fold some overcards like queen high and king high, unless he has a spade, which he will sometimes. But some extra hands are folding. Ace high I don't ever expect to fold really on this turn, and a pair obviously it won't fold. So I do get called, and on the river I think it's a pretty bad spot to bluff for a couple reasons. Well, kind of one reason that leads to another reason. First reason is I just don't have very many value hands in my range, unfortunately. At least from his perspective. I mean, theoretically, I could be checking a lot on this flop with overpairs, although I don't think I really would at this point in the match. And I could also, I could definitely have some flush draws, though, at this point. I definitely would check flush draws to check shove sometimes. But overall, I just don't have a very wide value range here, and he knows that. He, can hand read. He's a pretty good player. He plays, I don't think I mentioned this, but he plays... I think he primarily just plays 5, 10, 6 max. So he's definitely a good player. And because of that, I think I get looked up here on the river by ace high pretty much every time. And obviously, if he has 5x or pocket 6